I Facebook, so I was just out preaching and something came onto my heart and onto my mind. And that is the word hatred, to hate. You know, it's not evil to hate. Did you know that? Not innately. Not sort of generically. It's not a foregone conclusion that all hatred is evil. It's not. Because I hate violence. Shouldn't we as a peaceful society hate violence? Yeah. I hate depression. I don't hate the person who's depressed. I hate the depression. It's like the devil's very clever, I was saying just a few minutes ago. He is always trying to set up a barrier to the thing he doesn't want exposed. Makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, that's how you hide something. It's very simple. You put a barrier, a concealment. Well, if it's a matter of a psychological thing, you have to set up a barrier that is psychological in nature. So how do you police thought in the written law? You have to brainwash the people, or brain soil, I think, because washing is a cleansing process, and they're soiling. So they're trying to brain soil human beings into believing, just by repetition, that it is not good to discriminate. It is good to discriminate. Absolutely, that's how you make decisions. You discriminate against your child running out in front of a car. That's a discrimination. The word discriminate just means to distinguish, to decide, to differentiate. You're discriminating between things all the time. It's just a matter of decision. It's just a matter of distinction. It's just a matter of deciphering, deciding, eliminating. Process of elimination. You have to discriminate to do that. So discrimination in and of itself is not evil. Are we getting there? Neither is hatred. Hatred is not innately evil, neither is discriminating. You see, because the word evil we have to get back to the core meaning of. It means harmful. Evil means harmful, and if something cannot be measurably quantified, qualified as harmful, you cannot discriminate against it as a logical, peaceful person in society. And what is the Constitution of Ireland at its core? It is anti-evil. It is be harmless towards your fellow man. Be reasonable in business, which also means harmless. So it's basically be harmless. That's what the Constitution promotes. Harmlessness, while other people have free will to make their decisions and voice their opinions and beliefs. That's it. And that's why Ireland is such a popular place to visit. Because historically, we didn't gag our people. Hold on a second. You're free now. You're free in Ireland. See, we didn't do that. Freedom we knew because of the level of university accomplishment, the educational endeavours that were part of Irish existence and integral to it, led us to a level of education where we could discriminate against psychological imprisonment. Now here we are in Ireland, and they're telling us to stop thinking. Don't discriminate. Huh? Don't make decisions. And then they're saying, it's presumptively constitutional. We'll make your decisions for you. Do you see how they trickily do these things? Because most people don't know what the word presumptively means, nor have they read the Constitution, nor has anybody looked at the etymology of the word discriminate, nor have they thought about the mechanisms involved in what they're actually trying to impart and put in place, such that they would usher the citizens of Ireland into a state of incarceration, a psychological concentration camp. And you are in a mind prison if you conform to hate speech nonsense. Because it is the devil's attempt to put barriers before discriminating against his tactics. Understood? He's putting up a defense. He has stacked his boys, the Freemasons, in government, and he's telling them, you don't budge. You use your power to what? Prevent people from questioning the rhetorics we put out, or expressing opinions and beliefs against them. You're all free to have your opinions and beliefs, folks. Don't do it, or we put you in prison. They put me in prison for a month. I said, we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have done that. It was wrong of us to do that. We shouldn't have put that man in prison. We shouldn't have done it. It was an injustice perpetrated by the state. Perpetrated by the state, injustice. Injustice perpetrated by the state, they said. And we shouldn't have done that to this man, they said. Because it was an injustice perpetrated by the state against this man, they said. Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan said that in the High Court of Ireland, she said. It was an injustice perpetrated against this man, she said. We shouldn't have put him in prison for a month. And also, it was an injustice perpetrated against this man, she said, that his rights were removed for 2 years. He was told he couldn't speak, or we put him in prison again. For 2 years, they said. So there were removal of liberties that Ireland is so proud about. They're so proud about their freedom of opinion and belief and their right to express it. We're so ahead of the game. You got to be wary about people who are pride and think they're ahead of the game, or in pride. You got to, because pride comes before the fall. And they'll happily fall along with you once they stick the toe out first to trip you. You getting the point? They know where they're going, because they're on the inside of the Freemasons' lodge, planning the calamity that leads to the sinking of the Titanic. That's who they are. So what they do is, when men like myself who come out and expose the corruption die, they get back to making a mess again. They just wait for people who will speak out against them to die. So God has to raise us up generation after generation, sometimes in the most unlikely places that one would think of. And here we are in Wexford town, where the Pike Man is and the Tree of Liberty, and they're telling me I can't speak for 2 years. They can't even tell me I can't speak in prison. They can't stop you talking in prison, and here they are, they think they can stop me talking here. And then when the judge of the High Court finds that it was an injustice perpetrated by the state, no compensation made, no restitution, even though it's the duty of the judge according to the Constitution of Ireland. So nothing but contempt of court by the judge. She's in contempt of court. She's in contempt of the Constitution of Ireland. Because she's not following it. Compensation, restitution. If you think I'm here for compensation and restitution, I'm not. So what's happening? So what's happening is the President of Ireland is on the side of the devil. And what he's doing, because he's a Freemason, and I have it that he's a Freemason because I was a Freemason. And if you're on the side of the devil, you are against unity and integrity and good morality. And we've seen that that's his form. We've seen that he's against good morality. He's against the precepts of the Bible, which is against the Irish Constitution. So they have a custodian of the Irish Constitution who's against its preamble. In the name of the most holy Trinity, from and to whom, as our final end, all actions, both of men and states, must be referred. We, the people of Eire, humbly acknowledging all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ, who sustained our fathers through centuries of trial. They put me in prison for singing a song with the name Jesus in it when the preamble contains it. Now they have a president who's against the Christian precepts and conventions. He's against the constitution he's supposed to uphold, and he's telling people to presume things constitutional which aren't. So he's committing sedition. You have a president committing sedition right now. He's committing treason and sedition by telling the Irish people he doesn't have to do the job that they put him there to do, in the way of failing to test the constitutionality of the bills he then adds as legislature. He's saying, I don't have to do my job according to the legislature.
King Charles is the king.
Okay? So we have to expose this corruption for the sake of the next generations, for the sake of the children and their rights to do what we're doing. So who do you think is going to uphold the rights? The corrupt ones that wiggle their way into power? No, they're not. The one who exposes the corruption helps the children to inherit their rights. So when they tried to kill with the quill, which is the old feather they used to dip in the ink and write with, when they tried to kill with the quill, we put down the pike and take up the mic. Right? Because we've got to expose their corruption, guys. We've got to expose the evil that's going on in government for the sake of our children, for their inheritance, for the integrity of the Constitution, for the upholding of the common good. We've got to expose evil. Jesus said, what did he say? Have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. He said, God chooses to operate in the world through faith. God institutes all powers on the earth. So if Jesus raises up a man like me, as simple and as weak as I am, I certainly haven't studied constitutional law like the president, who should know better than telling people just to presume things constitutional, when he's there to uphold the Constitution and to remove any ambiguity as to whether legislature is constitutional or not. So why don't they do their job? Instead of leading the Irish people to fail to know what that job is. Do you see the point? If you are the president and you want to implement anti-Christian, immoral rhetoric, one second, through the bill, through the legislature, one second, then what would you do? You would try to reduce awareness of what it is you should be doing, which is upholding the Constitution. So if my job is to uphold the Constitution, and I want to not do that, but put in evil anti-constitutional stuff, then what I have to do is I have to try to remove your awareness of what the Constitution is. You see, so I would implement a term like presumptively constitutional. Because what would that do? It's telling you, just presume that whatever I write down is your Constitution, even when it's not. And then when you say to him, well, why don't you know it's the Constitution? Well, because I don't have to check. What? It's your job to uphold the Constitution. Why don't you have to check what's constitutional or not then? So you're not doing your job. And not only are you not doing your job, you're leading Irish people to also fail to know the Constitution, which is basically dissemination of ignorance and willful compliance with evil, unconstitutional legislature.
How are you on TikTok?
I don't have TikTok.
What's your?
This is Facebook or YouTube.
Get TikTok.
The
more people to see.
No, there are too many teenagers wiggling on TikTok.
Is it?
Yeah, it's too full of nonsense.
Yeah, but it's better.
But YouTube is Word on the Street Ministries.
It's streamer, yeah, I know.
Yeah, so you find it on YouTube. All right, cheers. All the best. Blessings. So, if you come to Jesus, what he does is he removes a veil of ignorance. He removes a veil so that You don't need to know the ins and outs of the Constitution to be able to identify what it's there to do. And because you're now at the core of what it's supposed to be, being that you're now operating in uprightness and righteousness and harmless toward your neighbour, you don't need a degree in constitutional law to identify what is against those conventions and precepts. All you need to know is, I need to be harmless toward my neighbour, and how to be harmless toward your neighbour, to know when the Constitution goes off course. And when people are leading you to degrees of ignorance, and by the way, I have read the Constitution of Ireland, and I will endeavour to read it again, but I can tell you from having read it that they're not upholding it, and they're not even having conversations around what are your fundamental rights, because they're fighting against them. And if they can lead you into ignorance as to what those rights are, effectively what they've done is made you fight against yourself. So they don't even have to take up a sword and swipe it at you, because you're killing yourself through ignorance. Jesus said, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. So what I'm here to do is to lead you to that knowledge which God has instituted, and that's the Constitution of Ireland. I know men enacted it in 1939, but nothing happens without God's will. Nothing happens without God's willing it. So keep that in mind. Say, well, then all evil happens because of God. No, God allows evil to form because he gave man free will, and evil will consume itself. You see, he doesn't mean he does evil. He doesn't. So what you got to realize is that there's something happening now. Satan is trying to remove the ability to expose him, or you come up against the guards. He wants to remove the ability to verbally expose him, and not just him. Like, he doesn't care if you talk about him all day long. What I'm saying is, exposing him, I mean exposing his rhetoric within society, exposing the immoral structures which are innately evil. He doesn't want you to expose those behaviours that he's encouraging within society. And he doesn't want you to have the ability to effectively have legislature removed that goes against your laws. So he puts those structures in place, those barriers. Firstly, the barriers to even know what he's up to. Then once you know what he's up to, the barriers to exposing him. And then even though you know what your rights are and the facilities which are there to enable your contesting their movements in government, then they just blatantly, barefacedly fail to do what they are committed to do. And I have a perfect example for that. I brought the testing of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006. I brought it into the High Court for testing. They said they tested. Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan was tasked with carrying out the test, number 1 on the schedule. Midway through the case, they abandoned it. Why? It was number 1 on the schedule. Why didn't you address it first? You wouldn't have had the opportunity for the case to go on halfway and then abandon it. That's why. So if they had have dealt with number 1 on the schedule in sequence and in order, they couldn't have abandoned it. So who does things back to front? Somebody who's deliberately avoiding doing something puts it last, and then comes up with, a sort of a delay and a lag, and gets everybody disinterested and lets the trail run cold, and then just doesn't do it. And that's exactly what they did. It was all in the newspaper. They were all throwing stones at me and mud, and I was stuck in the modern day stocks there, your head in your hands like that. I was stuck there, and they were throwing fruit and veg at me and muddying me up and all sorts of names and all. And it was in the newspaper, and then it goes into court and everything goes quiet. Took years. Took years for them to get their barristers together. They kept kicking it down the road, let the trail go cold. They call that kicking it down the road. So that's what they did. They kicked it down the road. What happened? They didn't do it. But you know what they did? Because there were other things on the schedule in that court case. They did them. I was put in prison for a month. They said that was an injustice perpetrated by the state. I shouldn't have been put in prison. I was told I couldn't speak here for 2 years. they said that was an injustice perpetrated by the state. They shouldn't have told you to do that. It was on the basis of an unlawful civil order. They didn't go about that right. It didn't exist. It wasn't a valid order, therefore they did that wrongfully to you. You telling me that for 2 years I wasn't allowed to speak here under threat of imprisonment, and after I spent a month in prison, and you're deeming both of those perpetrated injustices of the state against my person, and you're not going to compensate me a cent? It is her constitutional duty to motion for compensation, a restitution order, or a restitution order, and she didn't. But what she elected to do instead was abandon the testing of the sections under which both those injustices were perpetrated to begin with. Are you getting the point now? So they said we did wrong, but the sections under which we did the wrong, just abandon the testing of those for their constitutionality. See the point? So the constitutional duty is to implement what? Restitution, compensation. They didn't even have the conversation. Then they appealed it a month and 4 days late, after the final date to appeal had subsided, and they entertained the appeal. It went to the Court of Appeal. Then what happened? The three judges of the Court of Appeal said that which was supposed to be tested but wasn't tested has to be presumed constitutional. It's presumptively constitutional. I was like, are they for real? And then do you know what they said? Give the man 150, namely myself, give the man 150 euros for his day in court here today. What? You deem that this man is due compensation, and it's the amount of 150 euros for his day in court, but not the month in prison, and not the 2 years reduction of liberty in the form of you can't speak or record. So do you see the level here of criminality, the level of occupancy in our courts and in our government, where they are bold-facedly, barefacedly failing to implement that which is the Constitution of Ireland? On every level. High Court say, yeah, we'll test that, and don't. Yeah, this man had injustices. Yeah, no restitution, no compensation. Yeah, the president's supposed to check the constitutionality of things. No, he doesn't have to do that anymore. We'll just presume them constitutional. I mean, this is mad. It's absolutely mad. You couldn't reason it, let alone at the level of education these men are at. You couldn't reason it. It's not basically illogical, basically upside down, basically backward. It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense. So the term presumptively constitutional, well, is the tree behind me presumptively a tree? No, it's certainly a tree, because we have evidence that it's a tree. So what I'm saying to you is you can't presume and know something at the same time. So if they're telling us to presume something is constitutional, they're telling us not to know it is. That's leading us to ignorance. Not only are they telling us not to know it is, they're telling us to pretend as though it were constitutional, even though they're refusing to test it. So they're exposed, because they're saying this is legislature. We say, is that constitutional? Legislature? We'll check. Then they say, we didn't check, but presume it's constitutional, as though we did check, and treat it like it's the law. But you had an opportunity to test it there, to remove any ambiguity. Isn't it your job to know the law and uphold it and implement it, and as a custodian to hand it on to the next generations? Just presume it's the law. So give that man no compensation for his month in prison, which, by the way, if you're in England, it's £6,000 a day. So they'd be into me for £180,000 sterling for the month in prison. What rate would you apply to a day not being allowed to speak? That's a greater degree of immunity, of reduction of liberty. It's actually a greater degree of reduction of liberty to tell somebody they can't talk than to put them in a prison cell. They can't tell you not to speak in a prison cell. It's a greater reduction of liberty to tell somebody they can't speak than to put them in a prison cell.
It's just like, I don't know.
So would you give them maybe £6,000 a day for telling them you can't speak? They'd be into me for millions. They would be into me for millions upon millions. if you applied the proper rate for telling somebody they can't speak. And they want to give me €150 for my days in the Court of Appeal. For my day in the Court of Appeal, they want to give me €150. Was there due compensation then? Do you see what a pigsty it has become? These are pirates. Behaviourally. They're stealing from you. But they're not only stealing from you, they're leading you to steal from yourself by leading you first to ignorance. Jesus said, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. And will you accept that ignorance? It's all part of the same corruption. It's lead people to ignorance as to what the law is, so we can lead them to ignorance as to what the preservations surrounding good morality and the implementation of same, so that we can basically implement increased degrees of ignorance and immorality as a result of that ignorance by repeatedly telling people that evil is good. And then nobody will be allowed to come out because we'll just say they're being evil then and they're intolerant and hate speech, and we'll tell them they can't expose the devil and his immorality. And here we are, and all of this is playing out now, and I'm saying out before the people of Ireland, your government are committing sedition. Michael D. Higgins is committing sedition in this country. He's, as custodian of the Constitution of Ireland, what is he saying? Just presume things constitutional? And he's happy with that. And not only is he happy with that, but everybody around him in his council is happy with that. Or are happy with that. Huh? So we continue to expose it. Day after day, month after month, year after year, we will continue to expose it. You know what I mean? So, the Constitution of Ireland is in black and white on paper, so you can't, as custodian of it, make presumptions as to what is constitutional and what isn't, and be doing your job. You can't do it. You simply can't do it. It's highly criminal. It is the opposite of your job as upholder or custodian of the Constitution, as president. So here you see, they are absolutely committing treason and sedition and should be removed with immediate effect, and according to the laws of Ireland, imprisoned for life. This is the law of Ireland. It's the extant law of the land. It's the current law in this country. That as president of the custodian, or president and custodian of the Constitution, you have to implement it with certainty. And so that's why you study constitutional law. To lead others to ignorance as to what is and what isn't constitutional, or in other words, to tell them that things are presumptively constitutional, is sedition. It's not the potential for sedition. It is and of itself sedition, because it's proposing that the president shouldn't have certainty as to what the Constitution is, when it goes against basic logic and basic governance. So that is the overthrow of the government. To overthrow the effectiveness of the government is to overthrow the government. To deliberately overthrow the proper implementation of the government is to overthrow the government. To deliberately overthrow or create ambiguity or failure to implement the Constitution as the one that's tasked with implementing it is sedition. It is the overthrow of the government. So what is the government? The government is the implementation of the Constitution. That's their function. So if you don't implement the Constitution, or you don't have certainty as to what it is, and that's your claim, you're effectively redundant as a government. You're effectively udders on a bull. You're effectively useless. You're just for show. You're just dangling there, useless. So the point is this, that if you're there in the seat of president and you're leading people to ignorance as to what the Constitution is instead of implementing it, you have committed sedition. That is effectively the overthrow of the government, because the effectiveness of the government has been nullified, therefore overthrown. Very, very simple. So, if anybody wants to contest that or have a conversation, note they're all still in hiding. Nobody has addressed me or contested me. They've been running from me since my name was in the High Court. Since I was in the Court of Appeal, they've been running from me, thinking they can fob me off with €150 for me bus fare or whatever for the day, and I was just going to go away and think, yay, I'm not going to prison again. Hardly. Did they think I was stupid? So obviously, under command of God of heaven, Adonai Elohim Yahweh, I'm standing here in his strength and faith in him, and I know that he can remove Satan and this sort of conduct and legislature if he chooses to. I know that. And so Satan should be making moves to leave, and will be. It's not like they just sit down in a muddy puddle saying we're not going. They go when he says go. So the rest is just for show. It's just a little show. They just sit there going, no, we're not going, as they're being removed, They would even, as they were being carted off to prison, say, we're not going to prison. We're not. I won't go. I'm not going. That's just their nature. All the way into the pit, they would be saying, we're not going to the pit. While they were being carried there, nearly. The kind of, you don't win, I win. That's just their nature. So, sedition is basically the overthrow of the government, and to effectively remove the implementation of the Constitution is effectively the overthrow of the government, because the government's primary task is the implementation and upholding of the Constitution of Ireland, which the Irish people hand them. So why would you be trying to make the Irish people who hand you the Constitution ignorant as to what it is? So we'll continue to expose it. My hand is going numb from holding the phone. The battery's about to go, so good timing. Blessings in Jesus' name. Praise the Lord.